But tonight, despite the release of more than 60 hostages, the harrowing wait goes on for many families awaiting news of their loved ones. Israel says that its youngest hostage, shamefully a 10-month-old baby, has been handed to another terror group, meaning Hamas is no longer in control of that poor child's fate. Well, Sharone Lifschitz was abducted by Hamas for 16 days, later released on October the 23rd, memorably shaking hands with one of her captors. However, her husband, Oded Lifschitz, remains in captivity. And their daughter, Sharone Lifschitz, joins me now. Sharone, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. And first of all, let me just say your story has been one of the stories out of this hellish situation that's touched me the most. I think anyone who has parents still alive will have, I think, had their hearts just wrenched by what's happened to you. The idea that on that awful day, October the 7th, you lost both of them and had no idea what had happened to either of them. And then you have the joy of your mother returning, but you have the despair of still not knowing where your father is. So first of all, let me just say my heart goes out to you and to your family for what you've had to go through. It is an unrelenting horror, and it must have been incredibly stressful. But second, let me just take you back to October the 7th. Let me just ask you, when was the first you knew about what was happening that day?
We got up early with my son and my husband to go up north to York. We live in London, to pick up a puppy, actually, that we've been planning for months. And I opened some news outlet and saw that it flared up. I called my mum, as I always do, and I couldn't get hold of her. I then called my brother, and he told me that there's been a barrage of missiles and now they broke the fence. And that was how it started.
And they didn't just break the fence, they of course attacked a number of kibbutzes, including near Oz, where your parents lived and had lived for a very long time. When was the moment that you discovered that they had both disappeared, been taken?
So it's been a long day, and we were on WhatsApp group with other members of the kibbutz. People were desperately trying to help each other, to devise a way to contact other people. We were on the news. It was a horrific day. About an hour and a half later, I saw the Al Jazeera clip with the journalist saying about the fact they are occupying the kibbutz, and this was actually just behind my parents' house. And so by that point, I knew that things are never going to be the same. But then we had many hours hearing so many rumors and hearing stories from people. And about 8 o'clock in the evening, it took 8 hours for the army to arrive in the kibbutz, and not one shot was really shot at the terrorists. They came in, they did what they wanted, they went as far as they could, and then they left. So we heard about 8 o'clock in the evening that my parents were missing from the room. In retrospect, we know that the whole house was burning, but we were spared that knowledge at the time.
Absolutely horrifying. It turned out your mother, who's 85 years old, had been kidnapped by Hamas gunmen on motorbikes and taken into what was described as a spider's web of tunnels underneath Gaza. Did you have any knowledge about where she'd been taken or what was happening to her?
Well, my mom and dad were in the bedroom. It was quite early in the morning. They arrived late. My father didn't feel well, so they basically had the terrorists. The last my father spoke was to a friend, and he said, I can hear them speaking Hebrew. I can hear many shootings. And shortly after that, we lost connection with them. Then we know now, we knew afterwards that there were shots in the door. At that time, we thought they were taken together. At that time, we were just desperate, thinking they probably didn't survive or their health is too frail. And when my mom came out of the ground, it was like a miracle, because we really didn't know that she was alive. And just seeing her face, seeing her gesture, And then she told us that our father was shot and that he was injured. And so my mom was very pessimistic. And so for the last months, we've just been really so pessimistic about the chance of somebody as old and frail and with complicated medical needs to survive this ordeal. And then about 3 or 4 days ago, with the first women and children that came, one of the hostages actually told us that she was with my father in the same space for several days, that he was injured in his legs from being drugged, when he was being pulled, that he was injured in his hand, but that he was alive. And that's really the first time we heard he's alive. At the same time, we're also hearing more and more and more stories about the horrific conditions that they're subjected to. And so many of them did not receive medicine, even simple medicine that over 50-something days can really cause huge medical problems. Everything is a problem there. There's levels of torture. To think that they're on a holiday camp is part of the psychological warfare being waged against us.
It's mind-blowing to me what you're having to endure here, along with all the relatives, of course, of all these hostages, because the people that were taken were in the main either elderly or they were children, babies in some cases. It's beyond horrific. But I guess that you've had some great news, obviously, that your mother came out, and you've also had some great news that at least you know that as of several days ago, your father's still alive. That must be a huge comfort to you, notwithstanding the fact he's still trapped inside Gaza.
Well, we know he was alive about over a month ago. That's where we estimate that they crossed paths, that hostage that returned and my father. So we do not know. And the situation is absolutely desperate, absolutely horrific. I think that Alma Abrams she came back in a really bad condition, just purely due to neglect for the fact she was not getting her medicine. These are innocent people that were elderly people that were dragged from their home, that saw their families being murdered. These are people that are coming back to such a complicated, altered reality. We are uprooted, our homes are destroyed, people coming back, but they don't know the brother or the son was murdered. It's wonderful to have them back. They are our light at this great darkness.
Your father was a very well-known peace activist who would drive sick Palestinian children to hospitals in Israel. He spent his life in the peace movement. This is what he wanted, was to have two nations living peacefully side by side. And he believed you would make peace with your enemies. This has been what his life's been about. And yet there he is now, in Gaza, being held by terrorists, and you've no idea what may happen to him.
Yeah, I think my father's story complicates the situation for people who would like to just cheer for one team. And I think that in this part of the world, there are many people that realize that our capacity to live peacefully is only if we find a way to live peacefully alongside our neighbors.
Sharone, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. I said it at the start, I'll say it again now. It must be agony for you. And I hope your father is released very soon, that your family can be reunited. But as you say, it's so much more than just them. They lived in a kibbutz with 400 people, 80 at least were killed in the most barbaric manner. These are people they've known sometimes for decades, close friends. And the horror of that, well, I'm sure will live with all of them, the ones who survived for a very long time.
Yeah, it's amazing how when your life is kind of torn apart so much, you realize the kind of fabric and what it is made of, and how the love that we share, the way you overcome petty fights you used to have over little things. And in a way, in all this darkness, it's these people, some of them, I lived in London for 30 years. I went really far, and I see people I haven't seen for 20 years, and there's a bond and destiny has brought us back together. And I think that that's something that really carries us through it, the feeling that we are part of this extended community, even if we're very far away. And I think also, people have shown great generosity and kindness towards us. And in a way, that also makes me feel that, that we will have to find a way forward to this, that the legacy of these events, and we are learning every day new things. We are learning about rape, and we are learning about beheading, and we are learning there's thousands of stories, and the ordinary stories are just things that would have, been covered in the news for weeks for one of them, and there's thousands and thousands of these stories. The scale of it is overwhelming. There were 240 hostages. We are now down to 166. Many of them are, connected to other hostages, to people that were murdered. My heart is with all of them, with the fathers who are there. So there's children who came back to find that their parents were murdered. There's children who came back knowing that their father is still there and they don't know when they will see him. There's such a huge level of trauma. There's such a complicated situation that unfolds here. Sometimes it makes you feel really so desperate, and yet, I know, because I'm a parent myself, that we have to come out of it and let it be the catalyst for more than just more war.
Sharone, this is a difficult question, but I'm curious what you feel about this. As obviously Israel's response has been militarily overwhelming in Gaza, a lot of destruction, many homes wiped away, tens of thousands now of Palestinians have been killed, including thousands of children who obviously had nothing to do with any of this. What do you feel about the Israeli response?
As a human being, I find the loss of life, and I spend quite a lot of my time reading about it and trying to educate myself about it. I find this loss of life horrific. I also find that there was a very frail coexistence that was shattered on the 7th of October. And it's very hard to understand, to me at this moment, what is a good response and what isn't. I think that we are dealing with a horrific terrorist organization that is worse than ISIS, it's worse than Hamas, than Boko Haram. And so it's very easy to just say, don't do anything. But I don't know, then what do you suggest? One thing I know for sure is that it cannot possibly be that the people who have, come to us and raped and slaughtered and murdered us and trained for it and premeditated every element of it. I cannot believe that these people come back home and are kind to their own people. So I think that the Palestinian people deserve better than Hamas too. And I think that is something I'm sure about it. I'm not a military strategist, and I'm running on the pitch like hell, trying to save my loved ones. So it's not the best moment for me to kind of think about what is the best strategy for it. I lament tremendously the loss of life. I believe still that we will have to make peace with our enemy one way or another. I believe that my people have endured such a horrific trauma that we cannot contain it. We cannot contain it. We cannot contain the mass rapes. We cannot contain the killing of babies, the tearing out of babies out of their mothers. We cannot contain it. So at this point, it's really hard for me to tell you what will be a good strategy.
Yes.
I don't know. I know what I want. I want nobody to suffer from this ever.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And you say it so eloquently and so powerfully. Just finally, Sharone, how are you doing? This must have been the worst time of your life, of course, but how are you coping? Are you sleeping? Are you getting enough support?
I feel very surrounded by love. I spend a lot of time with my mom. My mom, life has changed so much. We're just trying to relocate her and find our feet in my parents' house was the center of our world. All of us are all of a sudden on the world stage playing, to the audience. I don't know how to say it. And it's just been really, really exhausting. And it feels that we need so much strength. We also know that we have found our voice and strength in the last 53 days in a way we could never foresee. And I think that we are carried by sheer fact that we have to do it, as well as by the fact that something should come out of it. We owe it to the people that are there. And I think the fight is working. This deal is the most important thing. We need to now continue it very, 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 very carefully, make sure that it's not going to be stopped in the next 2 days, but that it continues to the full maximum. And then we have to press on all governments, on the Qatari, on the Egyptian, on NGOs that have failed us miserably on the 7th and since. On all these people, we have to press on them to continue to bring these people back home, and then we can start really thinking what has happened, what could be done differently, whether Israel later. Now it's just about returning these people home. They're in horrific condition. Their life might end very quickly for all sorts of various reasons. I call on everybody who can do anything to bring them back home, to end that stage, and then we can look for how to move on.
Sharone, thank you so much for joining me. I wish you and your family all the best. I hope and pray your father is home with you soon. But I thank you for joining me, and I wish you and all the families of all these hostages who are living this unrelenting nightmare, I hope it is over soon for all of you. Thank you very much.